The monitoring station on Kepler 442b had been quiet for 3 cycles. Senior observer Zixtal adjusted her sensory apparatus for the 100th time that shift, scanning the deep space frequencies that carried messages between the civilized worlds of the Galactic Council. The job was mostly routine: trade negotiations, scientific data exchanges, and the occasional diplomatic protest when someone violated shipping lanes. But today was different. The signal came through on a frequency so primitive that Zixtal almost dismissed it as background radiation. Electromagnetic waves, crude and unfiltered, crackling with the kind of interference that civilized species had eliminated millennia ago. Her secondary brain processed the mathematical patterns while her primary consciousness focused on the source coordinates. Supervisor Kethran, she called across the monitoring bay, her voice translator converting her natural clicking sounds into standard galactic. I have an anomaly on Sector 779. Unknown transmission source. Supervisor Kethran glided over on his hover platform, his gas-filled body undulating with curiosity. As a Flothan, he could process multiple data streams simultaneously, making him ideal for monitoring station work. His sensory tendrils extended toward Zixtal's console, interfacing directly with the data feeds. Fascinating, he bubbled, his translator struggling with the underwater-like quality of his speech. The signal originates from system designation Sol 3, third planet from a yellow dwarf star. No known council species in that region. Zixtal pulled up the system data on her holographic display. The star was unremarkable, middle-aged, and stable. But as the planetary information loaded, both observers felt their species-specific expressions of alarm activate. By the 7 moons, Zixtal whispered, her carapace shifting to a pale blue color that indicated shock among her people. Look at the planetary classification. The data was clear and terrifying. Sol 3 was designated as a Class 12 death world, gravity nearly twice the galactic standard, an atmosphere containing the toxic gas oxygen at concentrations that would kill most known life forms. Surface temperatures that ranged from freezing liquid water to temperatures hot enough to denature proteins. Weather patterns that included electrical storms, rotating wind systems capable of destroying cities, and frozen precipitation that fell from the sky. Impossible, Kethran bubbled, his body darkening with disbelief. No intelligent life could evolve on such a world. The environmental pressures alone would prevent the delicate neural development required for sapience. But the signal continued. And as their translation algorithms worked on the mathematical sequences embedded in the transmission, a clearer picture emerged. The beings called themselves humans, and they were not only intelligent but had somehow developed space travel. More disturbing still, they claimed to have detected signs of an approaching interstellar threat. Zixtal activated the Deep Space Communication Array, sending the signal data to the council chambers on Centauri Prime. Within hours, the response came back marked with the highest priority seals. The council wanted a full xenobiological analysis immediately. Dr. Veltar arrived on the next transport, her reputation as the galaxy's leading expert on extreme evolutionary biology preceding her. The elderly Kethanari scientist had studied life forms from gas giants and radiation-soaked moons. But even she seemed shaken as she reviewed the data from Sol 3. The evolutionary pressures on this world, she explained to the assembled monitoring team, her crystalline form refracting the station's light into prismatic patterns, would create organisms unlike anything we understand. The gravity alone would require bone structures dense enough to support their body weight. The oxygen atmosphere would make them walking fire hazards. Their very breath could support combustion. She paused, consulting her portable data unit. But most terrifying of all, they evolved as persistence hunters. Their entire biology is designed for long-term pursuit of prey across vast distances. They can regulate their body temperature through perspiration, maintain high energy output for extended periods, and their brains are wired for strategic thinking under extreme stress. Supervisor Kethran's body had gone completely dark, a Flothan indication of deep concern. And these beings want to help us fight an interstellar war? According to their transmission, Zixtal confirmed, they have detected what they call massive fleet movements approaching our sector. They describe ships that consume entire planets and convert the biomass into more vessels. The description matches Council intelligence reports about the Devourer swarm from the Andromeda sector. Dr. Veltar's crystalline structure flickered, the Kethnari equivalent of a shutter. If the Devourers have truly reached this galaxy, we face extinction. Their adaptive biology and overwhelming numbers have consumed 17 sectors in Andromeda. No known council species has successfully fought them. The room fell silent except for the quiet humming of monitoring equipment. The implications were staggering. A species that had evolved on a world so hostile that it was classified as uninhabitable was offering to help fight an enemy that had defeated every military force they had encountered. What do the humans want in return? Kethron asked. Zixtal checked the translation algorithms again. According to their message, they seek only mutual cooperation and peaceful contact with other intelligent species. They appear to be motivated by what they call the right thing to do. Dr. Veltar made a sound that her translator couldn't convert, something between amazement and horror. A species that evolved through constant warfare, on a planet that tried to kill them every day, and they offer aid to strangers without seeking advantage. She moved to the communication console, her crystalline fingers dancing over the control surfaces. I must recommend immediate council debate. These humans may be our only hope against the Devourers, but we must also consider the possibility that we might be inviting an even greater threat into our midst. As the priority message sped toward the council chambers, the monitoring station fell into an uneasy quiet. Outside the reinforced windows, the peaceful stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that somewhere among them, two kinds of monsters were preparing to meet. One bred by a peaceful galaxy for exploration and learning, the other forged by a world that demanded strength from everything that dared to live upon it. The age of gentle expansion was about to end, and none of them could imagine what would rise from its ashes. The council chambers on Centauri Prime had not seen such heated debate in over 2 centuries. Representatives from 47 species filled the great crystalline amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, bubbles, harmonic frequencies, and translated speech that the universal system struggled to process simultaneously. Ambassador Threndal of the Peaceful Erosion Collective raised his feathered crest in formal objection. We cannot seriously consider military cooperation with an unknown species from a death world. The very concept violates every principle of the Galactic Accord. The Galactic Accord, rumbled Chancellor Vostom, his massive stone-like form grinding as he shifted position, was written when our greatest threat was trade disputes and territorial disagreements. The Devourers have changed everything. 3 days of debate had produced no consensus. The Council was paralyzed between their natural caution and the growing reports of Devourer fleet movements on the galaxy's edge. Dr. Veltar's xenobiological assessment had only deepened their concerns. These humans were not just from a hostile world. They were shaped by it in ways that made them fundamentally different from any known sapient species. High Counselor Arixna, her flowing energy form shifting between blue and violet hues, finally called for order. The debate continues in circles. I propose we make formal contact before deciding anything further. If these humans are truly willing to aid us, we should at least hear their offer directly. The vote was close, but contact protocols were approved. The diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge would make the journey to Sol 3, equipped with the most advanced shielding available to protect its crew from the radiation and gravity that would kill them in minutes. On the human homeworld, Captain Corwin had commanded first contact missions to gas giants and ice worlds, but nothing had prepared him for the approach to Sol 3. His ship's sensors screamed warnings about the deadly environment even before they reached the planet's outer atmosphere. The gravity readings alone made several crew members request transfers to other duties. Captain, called his communications officer, a delicate sylph whose natural habitat was the weightless void between stars. We are receiving transmission from the human vessels. They are requesting permission to approach and offering what they call environmental assistance. Through the main viewer, Corwin watched something that redefined his understanding of spacecraft design. The human ships looked nothing like the elegant curves and flowing forms favored by council species. They were angular, brutal-looking constructions of metal and ceramic, bristling with what could only be weapon systems. They moved with surprising grace despite their massive bulk, their drives leaving trails of controlled nuclear fire that would have been considered barely contained disasters by council standards. The lead human vessel was easily twice the size of the Harmony's Edge, its hull scarred and reinforced as if it expected to ram through obstacles rather than avoid them. Warning lights flashed across Corwin's bridge as his sensors detected radiation levels that should have been lethal to any crew. "How are they surviving in there?" whispered his science officer. "A floating crystalline being whose species had evolved in the pure vacuum of space." The answer came when the human ship extended what appeared to be a docking tube. Except this tube was clearly designed to create an environmental barrier between two incompatible life support systems. The humans had anticipated that their guests would need protection from human normal conditions. First through the airlock came Admiral Sarah Chen, and Corwin's first reaction was how impossibly solid she appeared. Where council species had evolved efficiency and adaptation to specific environments, the human was built like a living siege engine. Her environmental suit was not the elegant, minimal protection used by council diplomats, but a bulky, armored system that looked capable of surviving in the void of space itself. "Admiral Chen," Corwin managed through his translator. "Welcome aboard the Harmony's Edge. I am Captain Corwin of the Galactic Council Diplomatic Corps." "Captain," Chen replied, her voice carrying an odd quality that Corwin's sensors identified as controlled aggression, not hostility, but the constant readiness for conflict that permeated everything about her. "Thank you for responding to our transmission. We know this must be difficult for your people." The diplomatic meeting that followed challenged every assumption the Council had made about intelligence and civilization. The humans had detected the Devourer approach not through the advanced quantum sensors used by Council science, but through crude electromagnetic telescopes and mathematical analysis of gravitational anomalies. Their technology was primitive by Council standards, but it was also incredibly robust. "Our ships," Admiral Chen explained, displaying holographic images of human fleet formations, "are designed for combat in asteroid fields, solar storms, and gravitational anomalies. We build them to fight in environments where your vessels couldn't survive long enough to deploy weapons." Dr. Veltar, participating through quantum link from the monitoring station, asked the question that had been troubling the entire scientific community. "Admiral, your species evolved as persistence hunters. How does this translate to space combat?" Chen's response sent ripples of unease through the Council observers. "Doctor, on Earth we have a saying, we don't fight fair, we fight to win. Our entire military doctrine is based on the principle that there is no such thing as excessive force when survival is at stake." The human admiral activated a tactical display showing their proposed battle formations. Instead of the elegant, minimally destructive engagement patterns favored by Council forces, the human plans involved what they cheerfully called overwhelming firepower and acceptable losses. They spoke of ramming attacks, nuclear weapons used at close range, and boarding actions conducted in hard vacuum. "Your people fight wars to minimize casualties and property damage," Chen continued. "Admirable, but ineffective against an enemy that converts your dead into more soldiers and your destroyed ships into more weapons. The Devourers don't follow your rules of engagement." Captain Corwin felt his species' natural panic responses activating. "Admiral, are you suggesting we abandon our principles of civilized warfare?" "Captain, I'm suggesting that your principles work perfectly when fighting other civilized species, but the Devourers aren't civilized. They're a biological imperative given space travel and weapons. You can't negotiate with cancer cells or reason with a forest fire." The bluntness of the comparison struck the Council representatives like a physical blow. In their long history of peaceful expansion and diplomatic solutions, they had never encountered an enemy that simply could not be reasoned with. Admiral Chen leaned forward, and for a moment, Corwin glimpsed something that made his blood run cold. Behind the human's diplomatic courtesy was something that Dr. Veltar's files had tried to describe but failed to capture: the absolute certainty of a predator species that had never truly been prey. "We're offering our help because it's the right thing to do," Chen said quietly. "But I need you to understand what that means. If you accept our assistance, you're not just getting our ships and weapons, you're getting us. And we fight wars the way we evolved to hunt. We don't stop until the threat is eliminated completely." The transmission ended with an agreement to maintain communication while the Council debated their response. As the human ships withdrew to a respectful distance, Captain Corwin found himself staring at the scarred hulls and bristling weapons. Finally understanding why Dr. Veltar had called them monsters, the question was no longer whether the humans could help them fight the Devourers. The question was whether the galaxy would survive having two kinds of monsters loose within it. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a living nightmare made manifest in the void. Commander Zeftos of the Council Defense Force watched his sensors struggle to process what they were detecting. The enemy ships were not constructed. They were grown. Massive organic constructs that pulsed with their own bioelectric systems, each one unique but sharing the same fundamental design of efficient predation. "Tactical analysis, Commander," he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady as his communications officer relayed the information to Fleet Command. "Sir," replied his science officer, a nervous young Draknari whose scales had gone pale with fear. "The enemy formation consists of approximately 2,000 vessels, ranging in size from destroyer to battleship equivalents. But Commander, they're changing." On the main display, the Devourer ships were literally reshaping themselves as they approached. Hull sections flowed like liquid metal, weapon systems grew from the surface like flowering plants, and entire sections of ships merged or split depending on tactical requirements. It was biological adaptation in real time, evolution compressed into minutes instead of millennia. The Council fleet moved to intercept in perfect formation, 300 ships arranged in the traditional pyramid pattern that had proven effective in war games for centuries. Their weapons were the pinnacle of energy manipulation technology: plasma beams that could slice through any known material, gravity torpedoes that could crush enemy vessels, and quantum disruptors that could tear apart atomic bonds. "All ships, engage at maximum range," Commander Zeftos ordered. "Maintain formation integrity and focus fire on the largest targets." The first volley from the Council fleet was spectacular. Beams of contained stellar fire reached across the void, striking the lead Devourer vessels with enough energy to vaporize small moons. For a moment, Zeftos felt hope as several enemy ships seemed to dissolve under the assault. Then the Devourers adapted. The second wave of Council fire struck hull surfaces that had literally restructured themselves to absorb and redirect the energy. Plasma beams that should have cut through tissue and metal were channeled into the ship's own power systems. Gravity weapons found their effects neutralized by organs that generated counter-gravitational fields. Quantum disruptors were absorbed by hull sections that had somehow developed quantum coherence. "Impossible," whispered the science officer. "They're adapting to our weapons faster than we can fire them." The Devourer counterattack began with a sound that no one should have been able to hear in the vacuum of space, but somehow, every Council ship detected it. A hunting scream that bypassed their audio sensors and resonated directly in their minds. Bioelectric weapons lanced out from the enemy fleet, not elegant beams of energy but writhing tentacles of living lightning that sought their targets with malevolent intelligence. The Council formation, perfect in its mathematical precision, became a liability as the Devourers demonstrated they could predict exactly where each ship would be. The pyramid formation that had worked against civilized opponents became a series of perfectly arranged targets. Ships that had maintained position for optimal firing angles found themselves trapped in predictable patterns that the enemy could exploit. Commander Zeftos watched in horror as the CNS Radiant Hope, one of their newest battlecruisers, was enveloped by what appeared to be a living net of bioelectric energy. The ship's shields flared and died. Its hull began to dissolve, and then something even worse happened. The dissolved matter didn't drift away. It was absorbed into the attacking Devourer vessel, which immediately began growing larger and sprouting new weapon systems. "They're not just destroying our ships," his tactical officer reported, his voice breaking with panic. "They're eating them, and they're getting stronger." The battle became a rout within the first hour. Council ships designed for elegant combat between civilized species found themselves facing an enemy that treated warfare as feeding behavior. The Devourers didn't just want to win, they wanted to consume everything useful and convert it into more of themselves. Admiral Trokvan, commanding the fleet from his flagship CNS Eternal Vigilance, made the hardest decision of his long career. "All ships execute fighting withdrawal pattern 7. Fall back to the Kepler defense line." But even retreat proved difficult against an enemy that could adapt to their escape routes. Devourer pursuit vessels, smaller and faster than the main fleet, had analyzed Council evasion patterns and positioned themselves to intercept fleeing ships. What should have been an orderly tactical withdrawal became a desperate flight for survival. The reports came flooding into Council Command as the scope of the disaster became clear. The Proxima Sector, overrun in 6 hours. The Centauri trade routes, cut and occupied. The research stations around Wolf 359, consumed entirely, their biomass converted into more Devourer ships. Dr. Veltar, monitoring the battle data from her laboratory, felt her crystalline structure dim with despair. They're not just winning, she transmitted to the emergency session of the Council. They're demonstrating that our entire approach to warfare is obsolete. We fight to defeat enemies. They fight to feed and reproduce. High Counselor Arixna's energy form flickered between deep red and black as she processed the tactical reports. How many systems have we lost? 17 confirmed, reported Defense Minister Colthon, his usually steady voice shaking. And they're not stopping to consolidate their gains. Each system they consume makes them stronger and faster. At current rates, they'll reach the core worlds within 1 standard month. The chamber fell silent except for the quantum hum of the communication arrays. Representatives who had spent their lives believing in the power of technology and civilization to solve any problem now faced an enemy that rendered both meaningless. The Devourers weren't evil in any way they could understand. They were a biological imperative that viewed everything else as food. Ambassador Threndall, who had argued so passionately against accepting human aid, raised one shaking wing. The humans. Their offer of assistance may be our only option, finished Chancellor Vostom. His massive stone form had developed stress fractures, the geological equivalent of tears. But are we prepared for what accepting their help means? High Counselor, Arixna activated the priority communication system, sending a message across space toward the Sol system. For the first time in Galactic Council history, they were about to formally request military aid from a species they had never even granted membership status. The message was simple and devastating in its implications. To the human fleet, the Council formally accepts your offer of assistance. We require immediate military intervention. Current Devourer advance rate gives us less than 1 standard month before core world invasion. Please advise. As the transmission raced through hyperspace toward Earth, the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known waited for salvation from creatures they had dismissed as primitive Deathworld barbarians. The age of genteel warfare was ending, and none of them could imagine what would take its place. Outside the Council chambers, long-range sensors detected new Devourer formations emerging from hyperspace, each one larger than the last, each one carrying the biomass of consumed worlds converted into weapons of living destruction. Time was running out and their only hope wore the face of monsters. The human response came faster than any Council species had thought possible. Admiral Chen's reply arrived within 12 hours. Council forces fall back to defensive positions. Human expeditionary fleet will arrive in 72 hours. Prepare for immediate joint operations. What emerged from hyperspace 3 days later redefined every Council assumption about space warfare. The human expeditionary fleet wasn't just ships. It was a mobile civilization designed for war. Massive carrier vessels disgorged fighter squadrons, while factory ships began converting asteroids into ammunition. Hospital ships that looked more like armored fortresses prepared to receive casualties, and command vessels bristling with sensor arrays and communication equipment coordinated movements across light years of space. Captain Corwin, now serving as liaison aboard the human flagship Indomitable, struggled to process what he was witnessing. The ship around him was a maze of reinforced corridors, redundant systems, and blast barriers that could be sealed in seconds. Every surface showed signs of repair and modification, as if the vessel had been built expecting to be damaged and rebuilt multiple times. Captain, Admiral Chen said as she reviewed tactical displays that showed Devourer positions in real time, your people fight wars like they're academic exercises. Clean, precise, minimal collateral damage. It's admirable, but it won't work here. The human tactical displays were unlike anything in Council military doctrine. Instead of elegant formation diagrams, they showed overlapping fields of fire, calculated blast radii, and what the humans cheerfully called acceptable loss percentiles. Their battle plans assumed that ships would be destroyed, that crew members would die, And that victory would come through overwhelming application of force rather than technological superiority. "Admiral," Corwin asked, his translator struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in council languages. "Your casualties projections are extensive. How do your crews accept such odds?" Chen turned to look at him, and once again Corwin glimpsed that predator certainty that seemed to define humanity. "Captain, every human in this fleet volunteered. They know the odds. They also know that if we fail here, the Devourers will eventually reach Earth. When humans fight for survival, we don't calculate acceptable losses. We calculate victory requirements." The first engagement came when a Devourer scouting force encountered human picket ships near the Vega system. Council observers watched in fascination and horror as the humans demonstrated their approach to space combat. Instead of the careful long-range dueling favored by civilized species, the human ships charged directly into the enemy formation. The lead human destroyer, Relentless Fury, took hits that would have crippled any council vessel. Its shields flared and died, armor plating was ripped away, and atmosphere vented from multiple hull breaches. But the ship kept coming, its crew working in pressure suits as they manually operated weapon systems that should have been destroyed. "Devourer vessel adapting to our particle beams," reported the Relentless Fury's captain over the communication link, switching to kinetic weapons. What followed challenged the Devourer's adaptive capabilities for the first time since the war began. The human ship launched what they called depleted uranium penetrator rounds, solid metal projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed. The Devourer vessel's bioadaptive hull began restructuring to absorb the kinetic energy, but the humans had anticipated this response. "Target is hardening against kinetic impact," the human captain continued with professional calm, even as his ship shuddered under enemy fire. "Switching to nuclear charges. Close approach, proximity detonation." The human destroyer somehow accelerated toward the much larger Devourer vessel, launching nuclear warheads at point-blank range. The explosions lit up space like miniature stars, and when the radiation cleared, both ships were gone. But the debris pattern told the story. The Devourer had been completely destroyed while the human ship had been vaporized in the nuclear fire it had created. They destroyed themselves to ensure the kill," whispered Captain Corwin's science officer. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. "The Relentless Fury gave us crucial intelligence. The Devourers can adapt to any single weapon system, but they need time. Hit them with multiple attack types simultaneously, and they can't adjust fast enough." The main fleet engagement began at the binary star system designated Wolf 1061. The Devourers had converted the system's asteroid belt into a spawning ground, using the mineral resources to grow new ships. Council long-range sensors detected over 5,000 enemy vessels, their bioadaptive hulls gleaming with new weapons grown from consumed matter. The human fleet that moved to engage them was less than half that size. But Admiral Chen's battle plan didn't rely on numerical superiority. The humans had studied every council engagement with the Devourers, analyzing adaptation patterns and response times with the methodical thoroughness of persistence hunters tracking dangerous prey. "All ships, execute Hammer Pattern 7, Chen ordered. Remember, they adapt to what we use against them, so we never use the same thing twice." The human assault was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of elegant formation flying, human ships attacked in coordinated waves, each using different weapon systems. The first wave hit with kinetic projectiles. The second followed immediately with nuclear weapons. The third used focused electromagnetic pulses, while the fourth deployed chemical explosives that released clouds of corrosive gas. The Devourers tried to adapt, their hulls shifting and changing to counter each new threat. But before they could complete their adaptations, the next wave struck with entirely different weapons. Ships that had hardened against kinetic impacts found themselves vulnerable to energy weapons. Hulls that had developed energy absorption capabilities were torn apart by chemical reactions they couldn't process. But the most shocking aspect of the human assault was their willingness to accept losses that would have been unthinkable to Council forces. Human ships that took critical damage didn't retreat for repairs. They accelerated toward the nearest enemy vessel and detonated their reactors. Pilots whose fighters were crippled ejected their life support systems and used their remaining fuel to ram enemy ships. Boarding parties cut their way into Devourer vessels knowing they would never return. "Admiral," Captain Corwin said, his voice shaking as he watched human casualty reports scroll past. "Your losses are catastrophic. How can you sustain this rate of attrition?" Chen's response was delivered while she calmly ordered another wave of suicide attacks. "Captain, in human military history we have a concept called acceptable casualties in the service of mission completion. When human survival is at stake, those acceptable levels become very high indeed." The battle raged for 18 hours. When it ended, the human fleet had been reduced to less than 40% of its original strength. But the Devourer spawning ground was completely destroyed, along with every enemy vessel in the system. For the first time since the war began, a major Devourer force had been eliminated without a single enemy ship escaping to adapt and share tactical information. As human rescue ships moved through the debris field collecting survivors, Admiral Chen stood on her battle-scarred bridge and activated a communication channel to Council. "Command, Devourer advance force eliminated," she reported, with the same professional calm she had maintained throughout the slaughter. "No enemy survivors detected. Human expeditionary fleet is combat effective and ready for the next engagement." Captain Corwin stared at the tactical displays showing the incredible destruction on both sides, finally understanding what Dr. Veltar had tried to warn them about. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had demonstrated that they fought wars the way Devourers fed, with absolute commitment to total consumption of the enemy. The galaxy had found its champions, but they were champions who made victory indistinguishable from mutual annihilation. The final Devourer fleet arrived at the core worlds like a living storm made of metal and flesh. Intelligence reports indicated this was not just another feeding swarm, but the primary hive consciousness itself, the collective mind that had consumed 17 sectors in Andromeda and was now bringing the accumulated biomass of countless worlds to bear against the last free systems in the galaxy. High Counselor Eriksna stood in the emergency command center on Centauri Prime, watching displays that showed an enemy force beyond comprehension. Over 10,000 vessels, some as large as moons, their bio-adaptive hulls incorporating technology from every species they had consumed. The accumulated knowledge and resources of entire civilizations had been perverted into weapons of living destruction. "Human fleet status?" she asked Admiral Chen, who had been granted temporary command authority over all Council forces. "Reinforcement fleets from Earth arrived 6 hours ago," Chen reported, her voice carrying the controlled exhaustion of someone who had been fighting for weeks without rest. "Combined human and Council forces total approximately 2,000 ships. We are outnumbered 5-1. The numbers should have been devastating, but Admiral Chen delivered them with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to report weather conditions. Captain Corwin, who had spent the last month learning to think like a human military officer, realized this was because humans had never expected numerical superiority. They had built their entire strategy around being outnumbered. "Admiral," Dr. Veltar's voice came through the quantum communication link from her laboratory. "Our analysis of the primary hive consciousness suggests it contains adaptive information from over 300 different species. It may be able to counter human tactics before you can implement them." Chen smiled, and Captain Corwin had learned to recognize that particular expression as extremely dangerous. "Doctor, human tactics aren't based on technological superiority or numerical advantage. They're based on something the Devourers have never encountered before: pure, calculated spite." The human battle plan, when Chen finally revealed it, was so audacious that several Council representatives initially refused to believe it was serious. Instead of fighting a defensive battle around the core worlds, the humans intended to attack the Devourer fleet while it was still in transit. More shocking still, they planned to use the enemy's own adaptive advantages against them. The Devourers adapt to threats and share that information through their bioelectric network, Chen explained to the assembled commanders. Every successful attack teaches them how to counter similar attacks. But that same network has a weakness. It assumes that everything connected to it shares the same survival imperatives. The first phase of the attack began in the debris field of the Kepler system, where earlier battles had left thousands of wrecked ships from both sides. Human engineers had spent weeks in pressure suits, working in hard vacuum to modify Devourer biomass salvaged from destroyed vessels. What they created challenged every principle of ethical warfare. Trojan horse protocols activated, reported Captain Martinez from the assault ship Vengeance Incarnate. Biomimetic infiltration units are go for deployment. The infiltration units looked like standard Devourer repair organisms, living constructs designed to integrate with damaged ships and restore functionality. The Devourer fleet absorbed them without suspicion, treating them as salvageable biomass from earlier engagements. The units integrated into the enemy ship's bioelectric networks, appearing to function normally while carrying something unprecedented in galactic warfare, a virus specifically designed to attack living ships. But this wasn't a biological virus. Human cyber warfare specialists had created something far more insidious, a mimetic weapon that used the Devourer's own adaptive communication system to spread fatal behavioral modifications throughout their fleet. The virus doesn't damage their ships, Chen explained as Phase 2 began. It convinces them to damage themselves. The infected units begin transmitting survival imperatives that contradict each other. Ships start adapting to threats that don't exist while ignoring real dangers. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had survived every weapon the galaxy could deploy against them began tearing themselves apart as their bioelectric networks received contradictory adaptation commands. Vessels designed for perfect coordination started firing on each other, as the virus convinced them that neighboring ships posed evolutionary threats. But the humans weren't finished. Phase 3 of their plan demonstrated why persistence hunters had been the dominant predators on their homeworld. While the Devourer fleet was consumed by internal chaos, human ships began what they called pursuit hunting, not seeking quick kills, but systematic harassment designed to drive their prey into exhaustion and panic. Human fighter squadrons, piloted by volunteers who knew they wouldn't return, dove into the heart of the enemy formation. They didn't try to destroy the massive Devourer ships. Instead, they targeted sensors, communication arrays, and bioelectric nodes. Like predators bringing down prey too large to kill quickly, they inflicted thousands of small wounds that cumulatively proved fatal. Pack hunting behavior, Dr. Veltar observed with academic fascination, despite the ongoing slaughter. They're treating the entire enemy fleet as a single large prey animal that must be exhausted before it can be killed. The Devourer hive consciousness, faced with systematic network failure and coordinated harassment, attempted to implement the same adaptive strategies that had proven successful against Council forces. But humans had spent months studying those adaptations, and for every countermeasure the Devourers developed, the humans had prepared 3 different alternatives. Ships that hardened against kinetic weapons found themselves facing boarding parties equipped with cutting tools and explosives. Vessels that developed energy absorption capabilities were attacked with chemical weapons that dissolved their hulls. Bioelectric networks that tried to isolate infected sections were overwhelmed by human cyber warfare units that had learned to think like viruses. The final phase began when Admiral Chen herself led the assault on the primary hive consciousness. The massive vessel, more space station than ship, contained the accumulated intelligence of the entire Devourer species. Destroying it would decapitate their command structure and leave the remaining forces as simple-minded feeding machines. But the primary hive was protected by adaptive defenses beyond anything they had encountered. Its hull had incorporated technology from hundreds of consumed civilizations, creating armor that could counter any known weapon. Its bioelectric systems had evolved beyond the reach of human viruses. It was by any reasonable analysis invulnerable, which was exactly what Admiral Chen had been counting on. All ships, execute Omega Protocol, she ordered, and Captain Corwin felt his blood turn to ice as he realized what the humans intended. The Omega Protocol wasn't a weapon or a tactic. It was the systematic conversion of the entire human fleet into kinetic weapons. Every ship, from fighters to battleships, pointed themselves at the primary hive and accelerated to maximum velocity. They weren't planning to defeat the enemy's defenses. They were planning to overwhelm them through sheer mass and momentum. "Admiral," Corwin protested, "this will destroy your entire fleet." Chen's response was delivered while her ship shuddered under fire from the hive's defensive systems. "Captain, sometimes the only way to guarantee mission success is to remove the possibility of mission failure. If this thing reaches our home systems, Earth dies. That is unacceptable." The collision of the human fleet with the primary hive consciousness lit up space like a supernova. The bioadaptive armor that could counter any weapon couldn't withstand the impact of 2,000 ships traveling at significant fractions of light speed. The Hive's defensive systems, designed to repel attacks, simply couldn't process kinetic energy on such a massive scale. When the explosion finally faded, nothing remained of either the human fleet or the primary hive except the expanding cloud of ionized gas. The remaining Devourer ships, cut off from their command structure, reverted to simple feeding behavior. Without coordination or adaptive intelligence, they became easy targets for the surviving Council forces. The war was over. The galaxy was safe, and the species that had saved it had effectively ceased to exist as a spacefaring civilization. High Counselor Erixna stood in the ruins of the command center, staring at the tactical displays that showed empty space where 2 fleets had once been. The price of victory had been higher than anyone could have imagined. An entire species had sacrificed itself to preserve the freedom of strangers. Admiral Chen's final transmission, Captain Corwin reported, his voice breaking as he read from the communication logs. Tell the Council that humanity considers the debt paid in full. Protect the peace we bought for you. As rescue ships searched the debris field for survivors, Dr. Veltar transmitted her final report on the human species. They were persistence hunters to the end, she concluded. They didn't just defeat the Devourers, they out-evolved them. In the space of a few months, they adapted from a planetary species to something that could eliminate the greatest threat our galaxy had ever known.